Eli Cain's deep slumber was shattered by a sudden, brutal jolt. 7 decades of service in the U.S. Navy, including clandestine missions and the weight of remembered horrors, could not have prepared him for the sharp sting of a security guard's taser as he slept behind a department store. In the dim, early morning light, Eli's frail frame convulsed on the hard concrete, a violent interruption to his attempt at finding a moment's peace in an otherwise indifferent city. Eli, 74, had fallen into homelessness not through choice but through a cruel convergence of fate, mounting medical bills after his wife's illness, the erosion of savings, and the relentless grip of PTSD. His chosen refuge, a concealed alcove behind the store, offered scant comfort but was enough to allow him to drift between nightmares and dreams. On that cold night, his escape from memory's pain ended abruptly when the night security guard, Miller, prodded him awake with his baton. Mistaking shuffling for defiance, Miller escalated without compassion. Before Eli could even whisper, "I'm not bothering anyone," Miller's taser delivered electricity to his chest, and Eli collapsed in agony. The roar of the taser's crackle echoed against Eli's thin windbreaker. The guard smirked, jotting false details into his incident log. Non-compliant subject. The same tired mantra used to justify needless force. Passers-by recoiled, some recording on their phones. Eli lay trembling, blood pumping painfully as he processed the injustice and the pain. Yet even in agony, Eli remained strapped to discipline. He didn't reach for anger. Instead, trembling and gasping, he pressed a tiny, hidden panic button around his neck, a last resort lifeline from a classified veterans program. He knew the drill, long dormant until this moment. As he clutched the cold concrete, that silent signal shot upward to a Pentagon emergency monitoring station, summoning a federal response few would imagine in the pre-dawn alley. Within minutes, the world shifted. What began as a private security issue transformed into a federal crisis response. But for now, Eli remained on the ground, wounded in body yet unwavering in honor, holding to the dignity he had earned through decades of quiet sacrifice. Eli Cain's world blurred in pain, but in that haze he acted. As the burning electricity faded and he collapsed at his feet, Eli's fingers, trembling yet determined, sought the hidden fob beneath his shirt, a small, discreet panic button issued through a classified veterans program. Years of service in clandestine missions had forced him to carry heavy secrets. But this device was different, a lifeline meant for moments when civilian protections failed. Now, on that dimly lit alley concrete, wounded, cold, and alone, Eli pressed it. Within seconds, a silent signal, green LED glowing, flashed. Panic button engaged. While Officer Miller barked into his radio and onlookers hovered in horror or disbelief, Eli's distress was already screaming into a secure Pentagon monitoring hub. He had activated Nightingale Blue, a rarely used protocol reserved for veterans deemed highly vulnerable or at risk, especially those with classified service histories. This wasn't a prank. He had paid attention the day it was issued, but never expected to use it. The device transmitted his exact GPS coordinates and a grainy snapshot from a nearby traffic camera showing a lone elderly man convulsing on the pavement beneath a security guard. Within the hour, and remarkably within minutes, the response team raced toward him from an urgent but covert federal operation. These weren't local cops or city EMTs. They were a specialized Pentagon emergency response unit, standing ready for situations exactly like this. Eli lay gasping, chest still tingling, as the first black unmarked SUV screeched around the corner, followed by others that blocked both ends of the alley. Men and women in low-profile tactical gear, moving with rehearsed precision, fanned out within seconds. The leader, an imposing figure known only by call sign Wraith, knelt beside him and silently assessed his vitals, even before the ambulance arrived. Another operator snapped thermal panoramic images that verified the use of force had been out of line. Nearby, Officer Miller stood frozen, bewildered at the sudden arrival of federal operatives. He stammered, "Sir, this is private security. I had to subdue him." But Wraith's voice, calm yet authoritative, cut across the tension. "You've interfered with a federally protected veteran in distress. Stand down now." Miller's hand trembled on his taser. He was told to turn off his radio and wait for federal investigators. Amid the restless bustle, Eli was lifted onto a stretcher with care and respect. A federal medic checked his pulse, stabilized his breathing, and prepared him for evacuation. Not to a city hospital, but to a secure military medical unit following Nightingale Blue protocols. As the black SUVs faded, replaced by a discreet ambulance with no visible markings, Eli closed his eyes, relief washing over him. His panic button had worked. A veteran who once operated in total secrecy was now being rescued in total confidentiality, recognized and protected when civilian structures had failed. This activation began a chain reaction. The VA Inspector General and Department of Defense legal teams were alerted. Officer Miller faced a federal review for aggravated assault on a protected class. The department store's private security contract was immediately suspended. Training protocols regarding elderly and veteran interactions were urgently revised. Federal and local agencies received confidential briefings on Nightingale Blue, so future cases would receive immediate, compassionate response. Eli didn't know their names, but he felt their respect. The unit leader, Wraith, squeezed his hand and said, "Sir, you're safe now. We've got you." It was enough. As the ambulance whisked him away toward care he deserved, Eli clasped the fob one last time. A veteran, once invisible, now seen, and no longer alone. Eli Cain lay on the cold concrete of the alley, pain still pulsing through his chest, as the first black unmarked SUVs screeched into view. Within seconds, men and women in dark tactical gear emerged, not local law enforcement, but highly trained federal operators. Their movements were precise and purposeful, as though choreographed. They fanned out, promptly securing the scene. The leader, known only by his call sign, Wraith, swiftly moved to Eli's side, silently assessing his condition and signaling to teammates to stand by. Officer Miller, still hovering beside them, gaped in shock. His earlier confidence evaporated under the weight of federal authority. "This is private property," he stammered, "and I deployed lawful force." But before he could finish, Wraith fixed him with a steady gaze. "You have just interfered with a federally protected veteran in medical distress," he said evenly. "Stand down, secure your weapon, and await investigation." The words hit like a hammer. Nearby passers-by watched in stunned silence as Miller snapped to attention, trembling. Meanwhile, the tactical team carefully lifted Eli onto a stretcher. Their medic, already kneeling, checked his vitals calmly, stethoscope to chest, fingers on wrist. Another operator scanned thermal data from earlier footage, verifying that the electric shock had been improperly administered. Wraith then gave the command, "Medic, prep for transfer. Extraction in 5. Even as an ambulance approached, the federal unit ensured Eli would be taken not to a civilian hospital, but to a secure military medical facility, honoring the protocols of Nightingale Blue. In the swarm of activity, federal agents collected evidence, drone footage, witness statements, Miller's taser logs, all to support an investigation into wrongful use of force and interference with federal protocol. A small VA liaison arrived silently as well, speaking quietly with Wraith and reviewing Eli's clearance for medical care. Local law enforcement officers, summoned moments earlier, now took positions on the perimeter, their earlier swagger replaced by deference and uncertainty. Eli, still dazed, opened his eyes as the medic gently lifted him, securing straps and IV lines. Wraith leaned in close, voice low but firm. "Sir, we have you. You were seen, protected. You matter." A soft sigh escaped Eli's lips, relief and disbelief mixing as he gripped the stretcher roll with surprising strength. As the stretchers and black SUVs began to move, Officer Miller was formally detained. 2 federal agents placed him in handcuffs, not for robbery or violence against a civilian, but for aggravated assault on a veteran protected under federal guidelines and for obstructing an active emergency response. At that moment, the difference between civilian oversight and federal responsibility became stark, visible to anyone watching. Eli was loaded into a nondescript ambulance, its driver briefed to maintain full confidentiality. The tactical team followed, batons at their waists, ensuring safe passage. Wraith stayed close to the back, offering reassurance. "You'll be taken to the Pentagon's Veteran Medical Center," he said. "They've already begun reviewing your case. You're not alone." As cameras and onlookers continued to record, the scene shifted from a simple security incident to a federal operation. News would eventually emerge of active-duty federal agents protecting a 74-year-old Navy veteran, responding in minutes, not hours, to a distress signal launched from a panic button. This was more than rescue. It was affirmation that even invisible wounds, addressed in the shadows, would receive action at the highest levels. The alley grew still. Officer Miller, escorted by federal agents, looked small beneath the silent black SUVs. Passers-by offered whispers, nods, some teary eyes. Eli Cain had not just survived another escalation of trauma, he had triggered a response that would lead to policy changes, training reevaluations, and a clear warning: America's hidden guardians are never truly forgotten. Building on the gravity of the previous moments, the events following the federal tactical intervention triggered a cascade of accountability and change. With the ambulance already rolling toward the secure military medical facility carrying Eli Cain, the tactical team swiftly turned their attention to Officer Miller, whose demeanor had shifted from authority to defeat. He was formally detained on site by federal agents not for trespassing or disorderly conduct, but for charges far more serious: aggravated assault on a protected veteran and interference with an active medical extraction protocol. Federal investigators began cataloging evidence systematically: Miller's taser logs, statements from onlookers, surveillance footage, including thermal overlays, and his own recorded admissions. Each piece of information strengthened the case that his decision to tase a sleeping, non-threatening 74-year-old man was not a split-second judgment, but a deliberate act of excessive force. At the same time, word of the incident rippled quickly upward. Local law enforcement leaders were alerted and soon found themselves summoned to a meeting convened not in a precinct briefing room, but in Washington's Department of Defense Liaison Office. Their presence alone spoke volumes that they meant all volumes. The stakes were national, not local. Senior officials from the Department of Veterans Affairs also joined, signaling that this was about more than policing. It was a moment to reaffirm America's commitment to its aging service members. Meanwhile, Prestige Imports, the company whose security guard instigated the confrontation, faced its own reckoning. The company's contract was immediately suspended pending review. Civil rights attorneys, coordinated with veteran advocacy groups, filed formal complaints citing violation of federal protections and misuse of force against a vulnerable veteran. News spread that the VA Inspector General's office would conduct a full audit of how the company trained and supervised its contracted guards. Community outrage grew as footage, curated to protect Eli's identity, began surfacing in veterans' networks, social forums, and local news broadcasts. Opinion pieces shared by disabled veteran coalitions noted the irony: a man who had once protected American lives in silent, dangerous operations now needed protection himself, and he received it, but not before suffering humiliation and pain. Local protest groups, especially those advocating for senior care and homeless veterans, organized peaceful rallies. On city streets and near the store where the incident occurred, they held silent vigils, placing candles and placards reading, "Protect our veterans," and "No elder left behind." As the fallout intensified, tangible changes followed. Prestige Imports announced a company-wide investigation, including leadership resignations and a halt in new security contracts until an independent oversight board could implement mandatory veteran sensitivity and de-escalation training. The city police chief, appearing on public record alongside VA representatives, expressed regret and pledged procedural reform, explicitly broadening the scope of permitted veteran protections and setting higher standards for use of force and quality of life enforcement. Federal agencies also revised guidance on recognizing and responding to veteran panic button activations. A joint task force, including the DID, VA, and DOE, was formed to review and standardize protocols across city, state, and private security operators. Eli's status as a protected veteran and the shock of a Pentagon-approved unit deploying on his behalf sent a clear message: when systems fail, federal mechanisms can and will respond. While Officer Miller awaited hearings, Prestige Imports faced financial repercussions, reputational damage, and a scramble to retain existing contracts under new oversight. Veterans in the area gained a renewed sense of confidence that filing complaints would not go unheard. Most significantly, policies changed to prioritize controlled compassion over bureaucratic rigidity, an outcome born from one frail, tased Marine veteran whose peaceful sleep triggered a powerful, united stand for human dignity. At last, Eli Cain was collecting himself in a secure military medical facility, far from the chaos of the alley and the flash of a taser. His bruised body and rattled nerves were being tended with the utmost care. Vital signs stabilized, pain addressed, and trauma acknowledged. Within days, arrangements were unveiled. Fully furnished housing in a veteran-friendly community, all expenses covered, access to top-tier medical and psychological care, and the reinstatement of every benefit that had once been tangled in bureaucracy. A service dog named Echo was also paired with him. Silent companionship for the battles still waged within. The system had not forgotten Eli after all. It just needed activating. In this moment, Eli understood something profound. Sometimes the support we most need lies hidden behind protocols, waiting for someone to send the signal. His panic button was more than a device. It was a lifeline. And when it was touched, response came swiftly. Not from anger, fame, or spectacle, but from systems and humans who remembered a promise. Once a comrade, always worthy of care. True strength, it isn't only in raising your voice, it's in knowing when to ask for help. Systems of support exist not as symbols, but as safeguards. And it's okay to reach out when you need them. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. If this story moved you, type support in the comments to share a moment when asking for help made a difference. Subscribe now for more real stories that remind us how dignity, compassion, and readiness to act can light the way forward.